October 8, 1871. While headlines across America would soon be dominated by the flames devouring Chicago, another catastrophe was unfolding farther north, one far deadlier, yet far less remembered. In the dense pine forests of northeastern Wisconsin, a wall of fire was about to ignite history's most devastating wildfire on U.S. soil. This is the forgotten tragedy of the Peshtigo Fire, a firestorm so intense it turned sand into glass, erased entire towns in minutes, and left behind a silence so absolute even survivors could barely speak of it. It happened on the same night as the Great Chicago Fire, but few outside the region ever heard its full horror. In the fall of 1871, Peshtigo was a lively, fast-growing logging town. Around 1,700 people lived there, mill workers, lumberjacks, families. The town bustled with sawmills, carpenters, and freight wagons. It was built on timber and surrounded by it, too. The economy thrived on harvesting the dense northern forests, and that meant debris everywhere, piles of dry branches, bark, and scraps known as slash. These flammable leftovers littered the ground like kindling across miles of wilderness. That summer, rain had become a memory. Northeastern Wisconsin was bone dry. Wells ran low. Crops wilted. Trees became matchsticks. The air shimmered with heat. Yet life went on, and so did the usual practice of using small, controlled burns to clear land for farming and construction. But there was nothing controlled about what was coming. People didn't realize it, but all the ingredients for catastrophe were already in place. They just needed a single spark and the right wind. October 8th arrived like any other day, until it didn't. By nightfall, the winds picked up, not a breeze, but violent, erratic gusts strong enough to knock over trees and rip the roofs off buildings. The fires that had quietly smoldered in brush piles and clearings suddenly surged with terrifying speed. Flames jumped across fields, sparks leapt from treetop to treetop. The sky glowed orange and red, and soon it roared. What began as scattered fires became a monstrous, unified blaze. Witnesses would later describe it as a tornado made of fire, a cyclone of heat and smoke that twisted through the trees, sucking in everything: branches, animals, homes, even people. It moved so fast, it outran horses. Entire neighborhoods vanished in seconds. Some survivors recalled the ground itself seeming to catch fire, with flames shooting from cracks in the earth. In minutes, the quiet town of Peshtigo was surrounded. In hours, it was gone. The blaze that consumed Peshtigo was no ordinary fire. It became what scientists now call a firestorm. That term isn't just dramatic. It describes a terrifying phenomenon in which a wildfire grows so intense and vast that it begins generating its own weather system. This wasn't just a wind-fed fire. It was a monster that created and fed off its own hurricane-like winds, sucking in oxygen, spinning flames into the sky, and becoming almost unstoppable. The firestorm's temperatures soared to over 1,000 degrees Celsius, hot enough to melt metal and turn sand into glass. Trees didn't just burn, they exploded. The wind roared with such violence that buildings were lifted off the ground and hurled like matchsticks. Railroad cars were flipped off tracks. Even brick and stone structures were no match for the searing intensity. Eyewitnesses who lived to tell the tale spoke of a sound louder than thunder, like 1,000 freight trains charging at once. They recalled skies turning black with soot and smoke, blotting out the sun as if night had fallen at midday. The fire didn't travel in a line. It leapt. Flames jumped rivers, skipped over gaps, and landed miles ahead of the fire line. Firebrands, burning debris carried by the wind, ignited new infernos far from the source. Survival was almost a matter of luck. With nowhere else to go, people fled into the Peshtigo River. Entire families dove into the cold, dark waters, hoping it would be enough to shield them from the blaze. Some clung to floating logs and debris, while others waded in waist-deep, holding children above the surface. Those who survived did so by staying submerged for hours, breathing only when they could, while embers and burning ash fell around them like hellish snow. But even the river wasn't entirely safe. In places, the heat was so intense it boiled the water near the banks. Smoke choked the air. Flaming debris floated on the surface, forcing people to stay underwater longer than they could bear. Some drowned, others succumbed to hypothermia, but many more perished on land, overwhelmed by the speed and fury of the firestorm. When the flames finally died down, what remained was a silence so profound it felt unnatural. Where Peshtigo had stood just hours earlier, there was nothing but charred ground and smoldering ruin. Not a single building remained intact. Trees were stripped bare, blackened to stumps, or completely gone. The landscape had been scorched into something unrecognizable. In less than an hour, the entire town of Peshtigo had been obliterated. But it wasn't alone. Over a dozen surrounding communities, small logging camps, rural settlements, and villages were similarly wiped out. From the shores of Green Bay to inland forests, the firestorm carved a deadly path of destruction. Nothing stood in its way. The human cost was staggering. Estimates vary, but somewhere between 1,200 and 2,500 people lost their lives that night, making it the deadliest wildfire in U.S. history by far. The exact number may never be known. Records were destroyed. Whole families vanished. In many cases, there was no one left to report who had died. Entire households were incinerated so thoroughly that remains were impossible to identify. In the days that followed, rescuers and survivors found bones fused to metal bed frames, bodies huddled together in ditches and cellars, fathers shielding children, mothers clutching infants, all taken by the same cruel fate. In some areas, so many people died in such a short span of time that they were buried together in mass graves. There simply weren't enough survivors to perform proper burials. And yet, outside Peshtigo, the nation barely noticed. The very same night, October 8, 1871, the Great Chicago Fire was raging to the south. It captured headlines across the country. Chicago was a major city. Its destruction was shocking, and the media covered it extensively. Peshtigo, a rural logging town in northern Wisconsin, its tragedy was largely ignored by the national press. The worst fire disaster in American history was overshadowed and nearly forgotten. So what caused this catastrophe? The most straightforward explanation points to human negligence. Lumber companies had stripped the forests and left behind vast quantities of dry, flammable debris called slash. This waste blanketed the ground like tinder waiting for a spark. Combine that with the parched conditions of a prolonged drought, and you had a landscape primed for disaster. For months, the area had received little rain. Streams dried up, vegetation withered, and the forest floor crackled underfoot. Then came the wind. On October 8th, a sudden burst of gale-force winds swept across northeastern Wisconsin. These weren't ordinary breezes. They were violent, storm-like gusts that turned small, routine land-clearing fires into monsters. The flames leapt from tree to tree, building to building, creating a self-sustaining inferno. Firestorms like this generate their own weather systems. The heat becomes so intense that it pulls in oxygen, creating tornado-like winds that whip flames even faster and farther. But for some, that still doesn't explain why multiple massive fires broke out across different states that same night. Here enters the more mysterious theory: Comet Biela. Comet Biela had broken apart decades earlier, and in 1871 the Earth was believed to be passing through its debris field. Some have speculated that small meteorites, bits of the disintegrating comet, may have entered the atmosphere, igniting fires on impact. This theory stems from the coincidence. Massive blazes erupted in Michigan, Chicago, and Wisconsin, all on the same date. Could a cosmic event have been the match that lit the fire? It's an idea that captures the imagination. The thought of a celestial body raining fire upon the Earth adds a mythic quality to the tragedy. But most scientists remain skeptical. There's little physical evidence to support the comet theory. No meteorites were recovered, no impact craters found. The more probable explanation remains firmly grounded in the human world: overlogging, poor land use practices, extreme drought, and a sudden weather shift. These were not the forces of the heavens, but the failings of man and nature's response. The Great Chicago Fire of 1871 is etched into American memory. Its story has been retold countless times. A major city consumed by flames, lives lost, infrastructure destroyed, and the birth of modern city planning in its wake. But while Chicago captured the headlines and the public imagination, another fire, far more destructive, raged silently in the north, the Peshtigo Fire. The numbers alone tell a harrowing story. Chicago's fire killed an estimated 300 people and destroyed 2,100 acres of buildings and homes. It was devastating, especially for a growing metropolis. But Peshtigo? It killed between 1,200 and 2,500 people. That's nearly 10 times the death toll of Chicago's blaze. And it didn't just consume a town, it swallowed over 1.2 million acres of forest, farmland, and settlements. The Inferno moved so quickly that entire communities vanished within minutes. Survivors described the flames as walls of fire that moved faster than horses could gallop. Some said it was like trying to outrun the sun. So why is the Peshtigo Fire barely mentioned in history books? One word: visibility. Chicago was a bustling urban center with reporters, newspapers, and national significance. When it burned, the nation watched. Resources flooded in, laws changed, architecture evolved. The city became a symbol of resilience and rebirth. Peshtigo, by contrast, was rural, remote, and poorly connected. When it burned, few outside Wisconsin even knew it had existed. News of the devastation trickled in slowly, overshadowed entirely by the high-profile disaster downstate. Yet in scale, in speed, and in suffering, Peshtigo dwarfed Chicago. It remains the deadliest wildfire in American history. And yet it is often remembered only in the shadows of a more famous blaze. A sobering reminder that history doesn't always spotlight the worst tragedies, only the most visible ones. Today, the Peshtigo Fire Museum honors those lost, preserving relics like a tabernacle pulled from the river and the site of the mass grave. Though overshadowed in history books, the Peshtigo Fire remains a chilling reminder of nature's fury, and of how easily we forget. If you found this story compelling, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, because some stories deserve to be remembered.